Hi, I'm James Governor, co-founder of RedMonk, and this is another conversation with RedMonk. Today I have Bill Higgins from IBM. We've known each other for a long time, Bill. I believe that we first started talking in the early days of IBM's adoption of REST. So I'm afraid we're possibly identifying our decrepitude, but certainly it's been a long-term relationship. It's always been good to work with you. So Bill, why don't you introduce yourself and what you do?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Bill Higgins. I'm a distinguished engineer and director of engineering at IBM, and I'm responsible for our foundational AI technologies.
Awesome. So foundational AI technologies. I understand, or in fact, I know that you've just made a launch in this notion of foundational. So, what's the product launch? What's it about? What is it? And we'll talk a bit about what you're trying to achieve with that product.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to tell the backstory. So if you think about the history of AI at IBM, especially, let's start with the Watson Jeopardy system from 2011. So the Watson Jeopardy system in 2011, it's not surprising when it came along because it was right at that inflection point where AI was going from 50 years of always being perpetually useful in the future to actually being something that enterprises and companies could practically adopt. And so after the Watson Jeopardy event, there was a tremendous amount of commercial interest in Watson. And so for those first 8 years or so, there was just a lot of exploration, trying different industries, started divisions, bought companies, started new products. But then in 2018, as you remember, IBM acquired Red Hat. And we actually shifted to a new strategy that we called hybrid cloud and AI. And right before then, I had led a pretty significant internal project to roll out a brand new tool set to IBM, GitHub, Slack, Travis CI, ZenHub. And the goal was really to help people work together better so we could work across company boundaries. And because of that, when we shifted to that hybrid cloud and AI strategy, I got the opportunity to basically work with those same developers who had just adopted all the new tools to embed Watson into their products. Because back then in 2019, when the Red Hat acquisition closed, there were only maybe 5 or 10 IBM software products that made significant use of AI. And we really thought it should get to a point where AI could be ubiquitous in all of the products so that the products were better and also so that they acted as a reference for our foundational AI technology. So that was 2019. And then earlier this year, we decided that those technologies had reached a point of maturity being adopted inside IBM that we should actually bring them to other software companies. Because one thing that we've seen is that very few software companies in the world, with the exception of like Microsoft and Google and Amazon, can really stay on the leading edge of AI. And so since we built these common components for ourselves for things like natural language processing, for speech, for trustworthy AI, and some other ones, we thought that we could provide value by making them available to the software companies who may not have a $500 million AI development budget, but would like to embed AI in their applications to make their applications better.
And when you say software companies, I'm assuming you're really talking a bit more broadly. These could be cloud companies. So much of software is delivered as a service today. You're not just talking about very traditional ISVs, right?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. It's funny when you look back at the history of the software industry where, IBM played a lead role along with Microsoft, really making it its own industry. Maybe 20 years ago, there were only like a dozen or a couple dozen really big players, and they all made the same products like IBM, Oracle, BEA, Sun, Microsoft. Because of cloud computing and the drastically reduced cost of being able to run internet scale workloads, there's, believe it or not, our numbers say that there's on the order of 30,000 commercial software companies in North America alone, and the number worldwide is around 50,000. And so, obviously, it'd be ridiculous for IBM to try to create individual products to compete with all those 30,000. So what we're going to do is we'll still make our own products and really focus in a few key areas, but then increasingly provide core technology, starting with AI, to the other software companies of the world, especially technologies like AI and later quantum computing that are just cost prohibitive for most companies to develop in-house.
Okay, so Bill, I asked you what the product launch is, and you gave me all the background. What is this product that you've just launched? Let's let people might want to know.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So internally, we have about maybe 10 common components that really address the common AI use cases. And they're adopted in IBM products already, so they're very robust because they've been running in production for sometimes up to 3 years. But what we're going to do is we're going to have a kind of a phased rollout for commercialization because, of course, you have to do the productization work, you have to create better documentation, and you're going to learn a lot from the first encounters with commercial customers. So what we just announced was that we're providing the embeddable version of our natural language processing technology and our speech technology, which are two of the most mature ones, both in terms of the long history of IBM investing in those technologies over the years, over the decades, in fact, but also for our internal re-architecture, the foundational AI technologies. Those are some of the ones that we did first. So they're already broadly adopted within IBM and therefore good candidates for that first wave.
Okay. And I mean, you mentioned like commercial customers, engagement with the customer. One interesting thing here is you talked about embeddable and the fact that this is a play that will be working through channels effectively. What's the product that you would be selling directly to an enterprise, or is this really just about the channel play at this point?
It's really just about for the embeddable software, it's really about the channel play at this point, because what we find is that enterprises really want the full-blown products that they can deploy and that have self-service interface. Whereas the channel partners look more like the IBM software products. And in fact, we kind of refer to the IBM software products as sort of like channel customer zero, in the fact that they have very mature, pretty sophisticated software developers working for them. And what they really want is the parts to put in the application architectures they've designed. So it's really the product, which we think are more suited to enterprises, versus the parts, the components, the embeddable AI that we think is more suited to the channel partners. But the same technology runs everywhere. So if you buy our Watson Discovery product, which deals with document understanding, natural language processing, document search, it uses the same Watson NLP component that we're now going to sell to ISV. So it's not like the technology is different. It's just, is it a product form factor or is it a component form factor?
Okay, so talk a little bit about natural language processing. This does seem to be one of the really hot technologies at the moment. It's sort of a clear use case for machine learning. What's the... I guess a couple of questions. Why do you think that NLP is becoming a thing now? And then I guess related to that question, I'd say, what's some of the differentiation? Why would a company that's out there building a service want to take it? What's the differentiation of your product? But also, why is NLP taking off now?
Yeah, I'm glad you said taking off now, because of course NLP as a field has existed for decades. I think the reason it's taking off now is sort of like how cloud computing democratized the ability to run internet scale workloads. I think because of especially some of the NLP in some of the hyperscalers and the like Hugging Face is an open source provider. I think a lot of people are realizing that it's now more feasible. So whenever I think about a new technology, there's really two things that need to happen for it to get broad adoption. The first thing is people have to understand how it's useful, like what use cases it can enhance, what use cases it can make possible, and then also, is it feasible? And I think one interesting problem I've discovered throughout this journey is that because the people who tend to be leaders at software companies are kind of like my age, like 40 something, they came up in an era, and I came up in an era before AI was practical. So when I went to school in the late 90s, AI was simply treated as a research field, whereas these days, I was just back at my university, Penn State, they have AI integrated into computer science curriculum. So I think a lot of the software leaders for a while there didn't realize that they could actually make their applications much better, and that they could actually use technologies like NLP without having to fundamentally reskill their workforce. And in terms of the differentiators, it actually gets to that point I just made about skills. So AI skills, especially at the high end, like to do the really cutting edge stuff, are incredibly rare. And because of that, they're incredibly expensive. And so it's only the very wealthy software companies that can afford to have large AI staffs. Like IBM Research has hundreds of people working on AI. very skilled professionals. So does Google, so does Amazon. But most companies can't do that. And so what we're trying to do is basically just through good software architecture, encapsulate cutting edge AI models so that they look like simple software components. So one of our design points is it should be as easy to pip install something like the Watson NLP technology as it is to install a Python logging library. So that's the first differentiator. The second one is that, we say our strategy is hybrid cloud and AI. And that means that we're going to bring the AI to the data, not force you to bring the data to the AI. And that's useful for a couple reasons. The first one is that every business finds themselves in a hybrid cloud situation, whether they want to or not, because it's just so easy for Division A to pick Amazon and Division B to pick Azure, and then they acquire a company who uses Google. And also for on-premises and edge use cases. And so one of our mottos is that our embeddable AI should scale down as well as it scales up. And so it should be able to run both a internet scale workload in any of the hyperscalers, or it should be able to run in a box in a McDonald's to do the speech to text for Watson orders to basically help, speech to text for ordering food in a little device that has to run disconnected from the internet in a McDonald's.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's interesting. I mean, to your point, a lot of this technology has proved itself in cloud scale, hyperscale. But if we look at something like Stable Diffusion, we've now got people that are installing it locally. So this is this notion of embeddability, or certainly the edge or being able to run in all sorts of environments. Clearly, the direction of travel. How is what you do different to something like Hugging Face? I mean, they've defined this model around transformers, doing a sort of a good job of kind of owning that idea. What's like the key? What's like the key language that you've got for talking about the ability to consume and use these models? How are you talking about that? What sorts of models are they? Why are people going to pick up this technology and be like, this is gonna make my life easier? Here is in effect a job to be done. What's that thing that people will want to use the platform for?
Yeah, well, first of all, we have a ton of respect for Hugging Face. In terms of what our key value proposition is, we really actually take a lot of inspiration from RedMonk's writing on the new kingmakers. And we recognize that when you're selling to another company, you have to worry about both the needs of the buyer, the concerns of the buyer, the priorities of the buyer, and the same needs, concerns, and priorities of the developer. And so I think Hugging Face does a really amazing job for the developers. And so what we're trying to do is an equally amazing job for the developers, but then also really because we've got the deep expertise with how do you serve particular industries, really majoring on two things. Number one is the readiness to run in high stakes scenarios like regulated industries, because we will also have corresponding, services to help people adopt this technology and really understand what are the risks of using applied AI for particular industry scenarios. Because the way, we talk about trustworthy AI a lot, and that's the real second differentiator. The way I've come to think about trustworthy AI, and this is stuff like, explainability, bias detection and avoidance, that what we've seen is because AI is a relatively new technology to broad adoption to many companies, they tend to just try to get the basic functionality right. Like that's hard enough in the early days. And then by not worrying about things like bias and explainability in the early days when they're just trying to make it work, they're actually creating a significant liability on their balance sheet without knowing it, especially as regulations come down the pipe. And so what we'll really bring is both the technology and the expertise to help adopting companies understand how they have to do better, not just the capability, but the trustworthy aspects, along with having the great developer experience.
Okay, so I mean, that's interesting because not everybody wants to start playing with the technology from the perspective of talking to IBM. So like, what if I just want to go and access this and play with it myself? Where would I go? Is it like on GitHub? What's the approach by which, and certainly you mentioned the new kingmakers. How have you made this technology more consumable? And what do I do as a developer if I'm interested in finding out more? What do I do?
Well, in the early days, we're working with basically a few key design partners. But then because two reasons. Number one, we just made the decision to take our internal technology commercial earlier this year. And so we're doing this pretty rapidly. But the more important thing is that we know how this works inside IBM, deploying it to the IBM products, but we feel like we have to learn a lot as we start to work with channel partners. And so in the early days, it's going to be intentionally high touch. In next year, in 2023, we're actually going to selectively open source some of the stack. We're still deciding which parts of the stack, and then also just make it more generally accessible to anybody. So high touch the end of this year, and then open source plus digital self-service next year.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Okay, so going from a IBM use internally, and that also includes Red Hat, to working with some third-party design partners. As you say, it's all about learning. Consumability is important, so you've got to work from that perspective, and then opening this up to more general developer audiences into 2023.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, great. Well, Bill, I think that that sums it up nicely. We'll be doing some more videos because I got a few more questions to ask you. But for now, I would just like to say, thank you very much for joining us. Do you have any final things that you'd like to comment in terms of the launch and where you are now?
Just that it's really, really nice to be doing one of these early talks with you because, I really think of RedMonk as just such an amazing source of knowledge and inspiration about the developer audience. So since this is focused on developers, bringing AI to developers, making AI accessible to developers, it's just really nice to do the first talk with you.
Too kind. Well, there you go. First talk with us. That's a RedMonk conversation. And thanks for joining us, Bill. And thanks for joining us, all of you. If you've got any questions about things like, NLP, speech, where we are in terms of AI, machine learning, let us know. Subscribe, ask questions. I'll pass them on to Bill. Bill Higgins is also, he's accessible. So yeah, track us down, subscribe, let us know, and let us know what you'd like to know more about in this market. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.